Oh, what a day, eh? Sun's shining, birds are singing, beautiful horse, beautiful rider. Everyone's happy. But hang on a minute, this guy's got no shoes. You can't do that. He's a thoroughbred. G'day, my name is Andrew Bowe and I'm a Master Farrier. I have been for a long time. But in recent years my job has progressed from that of a traditional blacksmith, shoeing horses, to that of a full-time barefoot trimmer. And along the way I've clocked up some high mileage. I've got to tell you, my worn out body is proof of that. Now I was very fortunate and I worked and shod horses for a lot of older people. From the last generation who grew up with horses. They were real horse people. Because if they had to go anywhere and they didn't ride, well, they had to walk. And they always called me the blacksmith, even though I was a kid really, working hot steel at the anvil, turning up horseshoes. But I like being called a blacksmith. It made me feel as though I was part of a fading tradition. One of the links to a past that is now gone. And I was out there every day, shoeing horses from dark to dark. If a horse came into work, I shot it, because that's what you did. I never questioned it. Now over time, as I got good at the trade, my job progressed to shoeing performance horses and veterinary referrals, and I was getting sore horses back into soundness. But was I getting them fully right? You see, my job was mainly concerned with steel work, and I was dealing with the symptoms. I was never really dealing with the underlying causes of problems. I never really took into consideration the proper function of a horse's foot. We all know the ones, yeah that's right, navicular horses. And what about the chronic laminitis, the ring bone, and the chronically bad feet? And what about the horses that weren't really lame, but they weren't quite right either? I always had a nagging at the back of my mind, and no, it wasn't a horse tick. I guess the seeds of doubt were sown in about the mid-1990s, when American farrier Gene Overneck visited Australia, and he brought with him his study on wild horses' feet. Now those Mustangs, they never had a lameness problem. Sure, they lived in a perfectly natural environment, but they didn't have a problem. About this time, my career as a farrier took a sharp turn away from tradition. I guess it was when I was searching for the farrier's holy grail, a cure for navicular, when I started studying the works of the early barefoot pioneers. The people such as Jamie Jackson, Rick Redden, Dr. Bowker and Dr. Rooney. These guys, they were unlocking the secrets of horses' feet, and they were curing horses with incurable lameness. Now how could I not be hooked? Ever since then, I have been devoted to studying barefoot. At first, I applied it to lame horses wherever I could, and the results were outstanding. And then I applied it to my own horses, and then to friends' horses, and then to anyone's horses whose owners, they had seen that barefoot was a better way. And now I'm a full-time barefoot trimmer, and I'm achieving so much more than when I used to put shoes on horses. Back then, really I was only managing pain, but now I am removing pain from horses. And believe me, that makes all the difference. So, pulling a horse back from the edge of the grave, be it from ring bone, navicular, degenerative joint disease, any number of chronic diseases, it's just another day at the office. We live in fortunate times. Our horses are no longer just beasts of burden. They are our playthings and our companions. And we have the luxury of educational experiences that were never available before. And we also have the means and the time to provide our horses with a much higher level of care than we have before. We're also lucky enough to ask, do we really have to shoe our horses? Is there a better way that we can care for horses' feet? Can we apply any of the parameters which are so successful for wild horses? I know we can. Now, blacksmithing, the shoeing of horses, has served mankind well for centuries. I lived it. I spilled a lot of sweat on the anvil, but that was the right way back then. It was what we knew. But the world has moved on. So the aims of this DVD are to show everyday horse riders the benefits of allowing their horses to have a barefoot lifestyle, and also how it can be done. Now, barefoot horses is such a huge and all-encompassing subject that this is just a basic overview. The nuts and bolts details will come at a later date. Righto, before we go on with the DVD, I would like to label the parts of the foot in my language so that we're all talking in the same language. Okay, firstly, we have the wall around the outside of the foot. Now, this wall consists of two parts, the outer wall and the inner wall. The outer wall is not meant to be weight bearing on the ground, whereas the inner wall is meant to be weight bearing. They're usually delineated by what we call the waterline, which is visible on some horses, but not this particular horse. And next to that, we have what we call the white line. In between the wall and the sole is the white line. Now, that is basically like the Velcro that holds the foot together. So inside of that we have the sole. Now, this is a picture of what we call live sole, which is a bit of a misnomer. I believe it should be called something like the foundation sole, because it doesn't have any life to it. It doesn't have any blood supply, it doesn't have any feeling, it's actually lifeless. But that's opposed to dead sole, which is the loose, flaky stuff that builds up on top of the foot on horses that are domesticated and not moving much, or particularly on shod horses that build up a lot of foot and that doesn't wear away and that fills up with dead sole. Right, now next to the sole that goes down the side of the frog is what we call the bars, and the bars are really just an extension of the wall. Okay, and they finish at about halfway down the frog, so they're the bars. Now, in the middle of the foot we have the frog, which is basically part of the digital cushion. It's the external part of a digital cushion. That is what I refer to as the landing gear. Next we have what we call the dirt line down the side of the frog, in the front part at the end of the bars. Now, this dirt line is basically an indication of where the live sole actually finishes right beneath the pedal bone. And usually when we set up a horse, probably on its first maintenance trim, we actually investigate where the dirt line goes to, just to know how much sole and how much concavity we really do have in that foot. Okay, the final thing we really have to talk about is the balance of the foot. Because this is a very basic overview, this video, we're actually talking only about balanced feet. But one thing I need to mention is the anterior-posterior balance. On all feet, we're aiming for the length of foot in front of the frog to be about 1/3 of the overall foot. And that gives us a bit of an idea of how much we have to back up the flare. That's about all the detail we need to get into for this DVD. The rest can come at a later date. If shod horses have helped us conquer and tame the new world, then why not stay with the status quo? Why fix it if it ain't broken? Well, sorry folks, but chances are it is broken. I've got a couple of sobering facts for you. 80% of all horses have their careers prematurely ended by lameness. 80%. And 10%, only 10% of horses at any one time are clinically sound. 10%. There is only one reason why we shoe horses, and that is to protect soft feet from abrasion and impact. Only one reason. But it's a multitude of side effects, some of which we're probably only just starting to realise, is what's causing us to revisit and even question the very practice of horseshoeing. Now, these side effects stem from the shod foot's loss of function, combined with an increase in concussion. So about now you're probably thinking, yeah, my horse is all right, he's got shoes on, but it's all right. Okay, but a lot of these effects are very subtle and they're insidious. They come over on a long period of time. I like to call these changes nature's little warning lights. Nature's little warning lights, they're a result of a horse's body responding to constant low-level pain over time. All facets of the horse's body changes. Firstly, let's talk about temperament. In a nutshell, their personality goes off over a period of time. They seem to become annoyed more easily, and there's more tail swishing. And they won't stand still when they're tied up. Horses can end up quite sour. Now, under the saddle, they're not as willing, and they seem reluctant to go downhill, even at a walk. They can seem to get heavy on the forehand and become quite rough to ride, with very abrupt paces. And occasionally they develop into a stumbler. Now, in terms of body shape, you might find the saddle doesn't fit as well after a while, and you start to find yourself riding unevenly. And the horse seems to move with a high head and a hollow back. Now, also the shoulders can become overdeveloped and the rump can become underdeveloped. It's like the motor starts to get at the wrong end of the horse. The horses won't stand square. They usually camp under with both back feet and front feet. And then there's always a multitude of muscle issues in that horse's body. And of course, we've got to talk about the feet. There's all sorts of changes in feet over time. Probably the most obvious is the contracted heels and the withering frog in the middle. The old saying, use it or lose it, is very apt for a horse's feet. And when the frogs get out of work because of a shod foot, they start withering away. There might be hoof wall cracks developing and going up the foot. And eventually these can lead to seedy toe. The withering frog might get thrushy. The overall health of the feet is just not as good. You might even end up with different sized feet. So it's an endless list really of nature's little warning lights. It's just a matter of being switched on and able to pick them up. There's not many traditionally kept horses with shoes on or traditionally trimmed feet that aren't showing some of these signs. It mightn't be a big problem today, but if nothing gets done about them, lameness is inevitable. You know, it's a funny thing, human nature. About now there's probably someone out there saying, well, yeah, sure, but I know a horse that lived to 100 and it wore shoes every day of its life and it never had a day lame. All right, but what about all the rest? Okay, so why barefooting? Well, in a nutshell, your horse will be healthier, it'll be sounder, it'll be better performing, and most likely will be of useful service for many more years. That's right, many more years than you would otherwise get if that horse had been in shoes all its life. Now that's a pretty big statement. So how can barefooting do this? Barefooting does this by returning the function to the horse's foot. And what are the functions of the foot that can only successfully operate without a shoe? They are proper concussion absorption through a good digital cushion, the proper circulation via the hoof mechanism, so that's the return of blood and lymph back up the leg, the protection of sensitive inner structures through a nice hard sole, and finally the proper usage of the body so that the muscles are all in their proper equilibrium and are not stressed. You can't get any of those things with a shod hoof. You get a horse that is lighter in movement, has better stamina, is more sure-footed, has better performance, and has an absence of degenerative diseases, including navicular disease, laminitis, ring bone, side bone, there's a whole raft. Overall, we're talking about a healthier horse. A barefoot on a horse is what the horse's foot would be like in a naturally abrasive environment where they have ample movement. Now there are two parts to the story. The first part is returning that foot from its current deformed shape within a shoe or with a traditionally trimmed foot back into the correct shape, the physiological correct foot. And the second part is conditioning the foot to be able to travel over all terrain. The second part's the hard part. Now we must stress that barefooting is not just pulling the shoes off a horse and trimming traditionally and letting the horse go out in the paddock. That's traditional trimming. You'll find when you go out in the road like that, your horse won't be able to do it. Here we have Jo. She's brought her horse here today to have its shoes taken off, and she is about to start on the barefoot pathway. How are you, Jo?
Not bad, Andrew. Yourself?
Good, thank you. And what's your horse's name?
Snowtime Adios Duke. He's a rare Pinto standard breed.
All right, Jo, it's been a long time coming, getting this guy's shoes off and getting him to start some barefoot work. So we better not waste any more time, we better get into it.
Okay.
Now whenever I pick a horse's foot up, I always ask it. I don't force myself on the horse, I ask the horse to give it to me. And that way we end up with a lot better, lot happier horse. Right, this guy being a standardbred, he's got pretty good feet. The biggest problem with this guy's feet is that because he has been shod for a long time, and even though he was shod fairly well, is his frogs are very narrow. They're contracted. They're not functional, and they should be that wide instead of that wide. So that's the biggest issue with this guy. Everything else is pretty good. He's got a good healthy sole. He's got concavity. He's got fairly strong walls. He's obviously gets very well looked after, this guy. Although you will notice a fair bit of wall missing there. We've had to keep shoes on a bit longer because he has broken a fair bit of wall out running around being silly in the paddock. So when I start on a foot, start on a setup trim, I always start in the middle of the foot, and we clean alongside the frog, which is a very ordinary dysfunctional frog, I might add. We clean any loose sole off immediately around the frog. We dress back any majorly overlying bars. And what we don't do is we don't ever touch the sole on the outer part. That's sacred site. Now, what our aim is for the wall of the horse not to be too far past the sole, so that the sole can come into play and be. It's sort of like a load sharing arrangement between the sole and the inner part of the wall, and that's how you have a healthy horse. So we take the wall down to just above the level of the live sole, and that's all we need to do. And then we remove the weight bearing from the outer part of the wall, because it's actually not meant to bear weight. You will see, this is not a very good example, but you will see the two different colours in the wall, the hard outer wall and the white inner wall. That's the point where they join is basically called what they call the waterline. And we basically roll back to the waterline where possible. The interesting thing about when I started going towards this barefooting, away from being a farrier, the way I look at a foot is just totally different. When I was just a traditional farrier, I was mainly worried about the wall. We had to have a good wall to hang a shoe onto. And the frog was basically inconsequential. It was just there. We just tidied it up and basically ignored it. And that's because, as farriers, we are not interested in the function of the foot. We're interested in a nice wall with a straight balance to the skeleton of the horse to put a shoe on and keep it there. But now when I pick a foot up, the first thing I look at is the frog and the condition of the frog. Because between the frog and the back parts of the heel, that is the landing gear. Right? That is the most important part. Well, it's all important, but the frog, that's very important. So there you go. That's all we're going to do. There's not much to do with this guy. And the next thing we have to do is pull the foot forward and dress the flare off the toe. Right, so the most important thing on the front of the foot is to address the flare. All right, flare is not good for a horse's foot. It's not natural. It's a result of basically of their domestication. Too much in soft paddocks, too much heavy weight, etc., etc. It's he being a standardbred, he hasn't got very bad flare, not very much at all actually. But we'll just address it, and we're aiming for a straight line in the hoof all the way down. No ski jumping at the end. So we'll just quickly address the flare. Like I said, there's not much with this guy. And then once we finish the flare, we just take off that sharp edge to maintain the bevel underneath the foot. Righto, the process is much the same with the back feet. We just pick him up and I just ask him for his foot. That's the way we keep happy horses. Now knocking shoes off is something you guys don't really need to know, because the first setup trim really should be done by a professional farrier or barefoot trimmer, because there are so many variables involved, and what I'm actually doing is just glancing over it today, because there's just too much information. And we don't want to give you information overload. Not yet anyway. That can come later. So we just gently take the shoes off without too much trauma to the horse's walls. And what we do is we clean all the crap out. One thing about shod horses' feet, they have that horrible smell of death from all the bugs that grow underneath. And I'll be very happy never to smell that again. So, same deal, we start in the middle of the foot, and we just take any unnecessary dead sole away, and his bars are virtually non-existent, and then we just dress the side of the frog. So everything's cleaned up as best we can, and then we get the nippers, and we just quickly take the wall down to just above the level of the live sole. They say you should never work with animals or babies, because this guy's leaning on me. Come on. Oh. Right, then we've roughed them out with the nippers. We tidy up with the rasp down to the live sole. The only big variable with a trim really is the height of the heels. Now, with a horse on a setup trim, sometimes they have a weak frog. You can see this guy's frog's been eaten away by thrush. So if we probably have to leave the heels a little bit higher so he doesn't put too much pressure on the sore frog and to in turn land on his toe, because we still want to land heel first. That sets up the correct mechanics within the foot. So now we just take the outer part of that wall away. And then we can dress the flare from underneath like this. It doesn't give you as cosmetically good a finish, but it does the same job nonetheless. And we'll just revisit the roll, make sure the outer part of that wall is not weight bearing on the ground. And that's a nice conservative setup trim. I'd be happy for this guy to go out and just start doing a little bit of light work with feet like this. Right, one thing we don't want to get too hung up on when we're barefooting is the cosmetics of their feet. It's one thing to have them have beautiful, cosmetically balanced foot that's nice in the show ring, but at the end of the day, pretty is as pretty does. It's we're talking function here, and the horse is not when the horse is going over a hard gravel road, he's not standing square on a nice bit of concrete or soft grass. So yeah, it's fine with a horse like this who has nice feet, but if he doesn't have nice feet, well, so be it. We're after how he goes out on the trail. Now we will be using cadaver legs. Now that might be upsetting to some, but please understand that these horses, really, they're now helping us to learn, and we might be able to save more horses in the future. Now, as we said before, barefooting is not just about pulling the shoes off and doing the traditional farrier trim and turning the horse out in the paddock and hoping that you can ride it barefoot. You might be able to get away with riding on soft grass, but if you want it to go on all terrain, it just won't work. You can see I'm pretty good at shoeing flies too. So what's the difference between a natural trim and a traditional farrier's trim? Because they really are quite different. This is the natural trim. Now what a natural trim does, it sets up the foot to land properly. All right, so it lands on those heels and on the frog and on the heels. And then it loads properly, so it's trimmed so that it can actually flex when it loads up, and then it can roll over a nice thick toe with a short break over, and the horse is away, and there's no strain on the horse's leg. Now this is all within a hoof capsule of good integrity. A healthy, strong wall, white line, thick sole, healthy, thick digital cushion, as nature intended. One tough unit. A traditional trim, on the other hand, is really more concerned about setting up a foot to have a nice flat wall. Really, it's about cosmetic appearance, either to put a shoe on or to have that horse standing nice and square for the sales or the show. Now where they differ is that a traditional farrier's trim is more invasive at the live sole at the toe. We actually shorten the toe, we leave the heels longer to stand that foot up, nice and neat. Also, we have a flat trim from toe around to heel. Toe around to heel. We don't scoop the quarters. And what we also do is we have a flat bearing surface all the way around, so the inside wall and the outside wall are on the ground together. One more thing about a traditional trim is it's actually quite hard to teach, because we actually don't teach to any set landmarks on the foot. What we're aiming for is a relatively high heel to get the frog off the ground and a relatively short toe to stand the foot up. But it takes a lot of judgment over a lot of time to actually do a correct traditional trim. On the other hand, a natural trim, we are following the landmarks on the foot. And that makes it so simple that just about anyone can learn how to manage and maintain a natural trim. Because we're looking for the live sole, the height of the heels and the frog being similar, and it is basically all pretty self-explanatory, as you will see later when we trim some horses. I am talking about two totally different approaches to trimming horses' feet here. Another reason I actually use cadaver legs is that I feel so strongly now about not trimming into live sole here, as we have done here, that I actually will not do that on a horse, because I know it doesn't do the horse any good. Now one thing I constantly get asked is how can a horse's foot possibly cope with a lot of work without wearing out? Now the easiest way to show you that is to show on the traditionally trimmed foot, which relies on the hoof wall. With a rasp, very, very easy to remove rasp. Remove the wall with a rasp. It's not very resistant to abrasion at all. So if that horse was to go out on the road, it would wear its feet out. This, however, the natural foot, which actually lands on the frog and only rolls off the toe. Now, if I was to rasp, I could rasp all day on this frog, and apart from making a little indentation, the frog would still be there. That frog is soft and resilient and tough, all at the one thing, whereas the wool disappears. And that's how they can go barefoot. Righto, so just to repeat, this is the traditional trim, this is the natural trim. It's the natural trim that we are trying to achieve. Right, now we're going to talk about maintenance trimming and actually show you the nuts and bolts of how to maintain your horse's feet. This guy's an Arab and he has fully transitioned bare feet. He did his first endurance ride last weekend, so his feet are where we want them to be. All right. Now before we start on how to trim the horse's feet, the biggest thing around horses is safety. Okay. I've been around horses a long time and I've seen a lot of people get hurt, and I've been hurt myself. So we've always got to have in the back of our minds safety with horses. They're unpredictable animals and anything can happen, even if they're quiet like this. So when we're dealing with a horse and we want to pick its feet up, it's important that the horse knows where we are at all times. We don't want to just walk up behind the horse and grab a back leg to pick it up, because that's asking it to get kicked. All right, and we should be feeling of the horse too. We should feel what sort of a frame of mind that horse is in, whether he's tense, whether he's about to do something to us, or whether he's standing there nice and relaxed. I can feel this guy at the moment, he's as happy as Larry, no worries. Right, so first things first, we have to tell the horse to pick its foot up. Well, actually we ask the horse to pick its foot up. At this stage of life they should know all about picking feet up. So what we do is we just run the hand down the shoulder, touch the chestnut, a quick squeeze, and the foot's picked up. And that's how it should be. And then we put the foot between our legs, and we gradually just ask the horse to ease into it. We don't want to upset the horse. We want to make this as enjoyable possible for them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a full setup, a full maintenance trim, and I'm going to use the tools properly, the way that they're actually designed to be used. And then later on we'll show you easier ways to use the tools if you are having trouble doing a proper trim. Okay, but we've got to start with the proper stuff first. So we just quickly clean the dirt and the muck out from beside the frog. You're probably noticing by now that bare feet don't have much rubbish in the bottom of them. They're usually pretty clean and there's not a whole lot to be cleaned out. This guy just needs a little bit of tidy up on his frog, and that is all. You'll be amazed at actually how little amount of work you have to do with barefooting and with maintenance trimming. So that's all we've got to touch underneath, and what we need to do next is get the rasp and just take off any excess length of wool, which he doesn't have any, or we have to take off flare and roll the outer part of the wool. So all we've got to do with this guy is just roll a little bit of hoof wool. And then we just run the rasp around and take that flare off. And that's really about all we have to do. So as you can see, maintenance trimming really is quite easy. It should only take you 5 minutes to go around the whole horse every couple of weeks. And really, anyone who wants to learn it really can learn it. Now it's the same with the back feet. We ask the horse to pick his foot up. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. When you have a horse that you know you can trust, to a certain degree that is, just run your hand down the leg to the inside of the knee, and then as soon as he picks his foot up, you grab his hoof, and then you step through and you gradually pull him out. We're not jerking him, we're just pulling him so he gives to us, and he's quite happy with that. And once again, this is a maintenance trim, and these guys get trimmed every 2 weeks, and so there's very little to do. It becomes a very easy job to maintain them. So the first things first, we get in alongside the frog. There's very little to touch there actually. because he's actually in pretty heavy work, I won't take anything off there. I'll just tidy it up a little bit. And really that's all we really need to do. There's no heel height to take off. All we really have to do with this guy is dress his flare off and roll the outside of the wall. And that's quite simple. Now you can see that rasps are made to be used in two hands. Handle at one end, a nice smooth bit at the other end to hold. And that's how you get the maximum use out of them. And we don't push too hard, we just flow. And then sometimes if you want to dress the wall off, the flare off the wall from underneath, we just grab the rasp in one hand. For those beginners with soft hands, really you need gloves. My hands are past it, so it doesn't really matter. And there we have another nice barefoot trim, maintenance trim. Very simple, very easy. Now that is a healthy barefoot. Right, now not everyone has been silly enough to be a farrier and end up with a body that's suitable for doing this job. So you've got to be very careful if you're sitting on the couch watching this now, to rush out and jump under your horse and think that you can be a barefoot trimmer. All right, you've got to break yourself into this easily. All right, so this job really shouldn't be attempted by anyone who is not physically sound, really. But however, there are ways you can approach the job to make it easier when you're actually doing the feet, and so you're eliminating most of the weight-bearing work. Still, with picking the foot up is much the same. Down the shoulder, inside of a leg, and pick it up. That's something your horse should know how to do. All right. You can also get your horse light in the legs, but that's another story about how to train them for shoeing. So instead of putting it between your knees and doing it the proper way, you can actually kneel down and put it on your knee like this. All right. Now, just when you're doing this, just be very mindful that horses are unpredictable animals. All right. And you want to set up a situation where your horse is, if anything spooks it, if possible, it's going to go away from you, not over the top of you. All right. And that's where it's good to have an experienced handler holding the horse. Right. So now we're down here. How do we use the tools? That's actually quite easy, really. You can sit the foot up on your knee, and you can use the tools one-handed. All right, and it's much the same as what we did before. Down each side. The only difference being down here, you really can't use two hands on the rasp. All right, they are designed for two-handed use, but if possible, you can get away with one hand. All right. So when we want to dress this side of the foot, we turn the rasp inwards, we handle inside. And this hand, and this is where you really need gloves, this hand grips the rasp and pulls it. And you can get exactly the same result as when you do it with two hands. And then you turn the rasp around the other way, and for the other side, you push it. And you can continue pushing it around the toe. And so everything can be done in the same fashion. And really, it's where you actually get to this stage of a job. It's really not a very big job, and we shouldn't say everyone, but just about everyone can do it. All right, so that's the front foot. Now we'll go to the back foot again. Now with the back foot, sometimes it's hard for people to actually get down to actually pick the foot up. So this little guy is the old man's hook, and what you do with this is you put it under the horse's foot, and while you're standing up nice and straight, no strain on your body, you run your hand down to the knee, and then you go straight to the hoof. All right, and so everything's up ready, and you just pull it straight out the back. Once again, you give in to him, and there's no worries there. Now you can actually get hoof stands that have a little sling on them, and you can sit the back foot on the sling. And much the same, well, with the back feet, much the same, you should still be able to use both hands if you put it on the sling. Right, so the question now is how often do you have to trim your horse's feet? All right, in a perfect situation, the horse would be getting adequate movement on its own in a nice big rough paddock, and it would be a self-trimming horse. Or it would be getting a lot of work out on the trail riding. But we don't live in a perfect world. So most of the time our horses need to be done about every second week, which is what we do with these guys, because the foot can stay in the correct framework even up to 2 weeks, and it's not a big deal. It's as easy as going around the horse if it had shoes on and picking the feet out with a hoof pick before you go for a ride. It should be just as easy as that. Of course, for broodmares and other horses that aren't getting ridden, you don't want to get too carried up about that. They don't have to be as tough as these guys. And so as long as you put a good healthy trim on them, so their feet aren't going to crack, they can of course go quite a lot longer. Now just a very quick word about horse handling. Now the whole time that we're working with horses, we're educating them. We're either doing it good or we're doing it bad. But the whole time we've got to be mindful that they're learning from us. So it really pays to be very calm when you approach your horse when you are trimming its feet. We don't want to be anxious and we don't want to get angry, because the horse picks up on that and the horse will react accordingly. Right, now I'm just going to demonstrate your average maintenance trim. This is how we go through the maintenance trim. The same pattern, you'll see the same pattern emerging all the time. I've got to be a bit careful with this horse because she's a bit tight in the body. So I've got to give to her. You can see how I'm bending inwards. This is less comfortable, but in the long run, the job gets done easier with less stress on the horse. Okay, so the first thing we do is we just clean anything out, any mud and muck that's not meant to be there. Right, and the next thing is we get our loop knife and we deal with any extra dead sole. All right, and there's not much. You can see there's actually good healthy live sole appearing down through here. There's only a bit of extra dead sole in the usual place around the sides of the frog. And that's basically because the horses aren't getting enough movement. And this is where the whole foot starts filling in. So we just scrape away the extra dead sole. I've just got there's a bit of give and take with this horse. We'll just run up the bars a little bit. We want the bars not to be weight bearing on the ground. And that's about as much as I would ever take off in terms of dead sole. You notice how we never touch this stuff when it's back to being a healthy barefoot horse. Now with the frog, her frogs are still not very well. She's just come through a fairly wet spring, and most of the frog has been eaten away by thrush, and it's waiting for the new healthy frog, which is down there, to grow back in its place. If we saw this foot in about another month, maybe 2 months' time, there'll be a beautiful new summer frog filling in that area there. And that's the landing gear. That's what we want the horse to land on. Righto, so the next thing is to take off excess wool down to about 1/8 of an inch above the sole. When it's a little bit long, we can use nippers. It's pretty simple really. And we finish up with the rasp, tidying up. Now the biggest issue facing this horse really is separation in the white line. If you can see right in there, there's a nice tight white line, but that's about the only spot on the whole foot. There's separation all the way through there, around to there and around to there. So we have to deal with that separation. We don't want it. And how we deal with that is we take away the lever forces. Where in the past you would have been getting a traditional trim with a nice flat wall. There you go. Good girl. All right, and I'll have to speed it up a bit because she's a little bit uncomfortable with me being under her. Now normally we only do that roll from the widest part round to the other widest part of the foot, but because of separation all the way around, we'll extend that roll around. Now because she's getting a little bit fractious, I'll actually change my position. So I'm actually going to hold with one hand, rasp with one hand, and that way I can put her foot back underneath her where she's a whole lot happier, and I've got fairly good control, and I can finish the job off. And then what we do is we rasp off the flare. Because she's a little bit fractious, I'm not going to pull the foot forward and pretty it up. As I keep saying, pretty is as pretty does. We're looking for function. And as long as we got that breakover and ground surface back to where we have it, the flare will grow itself out. And then I'll just go back and touch up anywhere where I reckon a bit more rolling will help the separation. And there we have it, a quick, basic maintenance trim.
Cut. 3, 2, 1.
All right, now onto the back feet. Now I know this mare well enough to know that she's not particularly comfortable in the back end. She's actually a bit tight through the body, and so I have to really work with her to get the job done with minimum of fuss. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask her very slowly for her foot, let her give it to me when she wants to, and try and work as low as I can to keep her as comfortable as possible. All right, this can be a bit of a challenge. So because I trust the horse a little bit, because I know this one. This is not how I normally pick a foot up, but I'm going to lean right down and ask her to pick it up, and she's happy with that. All right, and then I very, very, very slowly bring it out, and I get right down. And even though I'm right down this far, I'm still fairly safe, and if anything happens, I can get myself out of the way very quickly. Very important that I can feel through her body. I've got contact with her. I can actually feel what she's thinking at the time, and she's not feeling too bad at the moment. That can change. So we're going to be a bit quicker on this foot. We don't want to upset the horse. All right. So we quickly roughed out the sole, roughed out the frog. Quickly take the wall off, just above the live sole. Once again, you can see this horse's main problem. See that? She's just tight. It's all right, girl. We'll just go with the flow a bit. Wait till she's comfortable again, and then ask her again. You can see the separation all the way around. So the important thing is we knock off the lever forces that lead to separation. Oh mate, easy mate. Once again, I'm going to do this one-handed. I've got more control over her with my other hand. And we're just going to quickly knock off the lever forces. Work right through them at the toe, so it's not going to keep ripping. Hey, mate. I'm just going to finish her up pretty quick because she's never comfortable on this back leg. Just going to quickly rip the flare off. Down the other side. It's never as nice a job. But it doesn't matter how nice the job is if you upset the horse and it turns into a bun fight. And you can't help a horse if you don't get asked back. That's something we all find out pretty soon in our careers. So there you have it. Just a quick basic maintenance job. Horse hasn't been upset. The farrier hasn't got upset, and everyone's happy. Alright, so here we are at Tamara and Gary Fox's place at Yark. And we are looking at a very healthy mob of sound barefoot horses. All these guys are going soundly under work on any terrain, not a problem at all. So let's just go over a bit of old ground just for a minute. Remember, there's one reason why we put shoes on horses' feet, and that is to protect soft feet. But now we also know that there are many side effects to putting shoes on a horse's feet. So, is it possible that we can ride horses without shoes? Can we toughen their feet up? Yes, we can, but this is the hard part of the process. Now, before we get too far ahead of ourselves and talk about how to get those rock hard feet that can go down the gravel road, we've got to talk about a little process called transitioning. Now, that is the process of changing a soft barefoot horse into a healthy barefoot horse ready for conditioning. Right, now transitioning, it can last any time from 3 days, a week, 3 months. It's usually 1 month to 3 months. It can last as long as 12 months. It depends on how soft the horse's feet are, how much damage has been done during the shoeing process, how long the shoes have been on. There's a whole lot of different variables. It's the one thing that we do not know when we turn a horse out with no shoes on, how long it's going to take to come sound. So let's not kid ourselves. Sometimes you take a horse's shoes off, that horse is tender. If I took my boots off, I'd be crawling across the gravel. I've got to toughen them up, and the horse has to toughen them up. It's probably actually better for me that I don't have the damage to overcome that a shod horse might have to overcome. Our end goal is to have fully functioning, healthy, bare feet. Feet that can travel unaided over any terrain. They land properly on a healthy digital cushion. They load properly in under a thick sole, and they roll over their toe in the right spot without any trouble. That's what we're aiming for. So now we really need to talk about the barefoot lifestyle of horses. Right? It's not just about the feet and the trimming, it's about the lifestyle they have to enable them to have tough feet. So it's all about a barefoot lifestyle, and certain aspects need to be considered. First one is paddocks. Paddocks need to be large, larger the better, so the horses can move as much as possible. They also need to be as dry as possible. Most horses are adapted to drier ground. It's also good to have some rough areas that they've got to walk over to condition their feet. Round rocks near water troughs, feed areas, or even sleep areas that they can actually walk through in their movements around the paddock are a really good way to do it. You can also be creative with fencing here, and you can funnel the horses through rocky areas. The other thing to think about is the feed they get. We really need to keep it simple, grass and grass hay. Horses really don't need high sugar content grass. Another aspect, which we can see very well there, is the social arrangement. They're very definitely social animals, and I guess that's why they call it the neighbourhood. Shelter should be on the horse's terms, when they want it, not when we want it. So we don't really want to lock them in the stable. They also need some regular work on hard ground. And if that can't be available, they need regular trimming to keep their feet in physiologically correct position. Really, it's the gross lack of movement by domestic horses. That's the only reason we need to talk about trimming in the first place. Now, one other thing to consider is that horses really should only be lightly worked before about the age of 5. The loss of 2 years at the beginning of their life, it will add years to the end of their life. So apart from lifestyle, how can we help horses get through transition? Firstly, physiological correct trimming, and that's done frequently to maintain the hoof in the correct framework, and that indeed the horse's body in the correct framework. Secondly, we need to kill any infections in the horse's feet. Mainly thrush discourages horses from landing heel first, prerequisite for returning horses' feet to soundness. So we need to consider the environment when killing infection and keep the horses dry, if that is possible. Third thing is constant movement. As we can see, we need to provide the horse with lots of open space and a reason to move. And this needs to be mostly on firm ground so hoof mechanism can work properly. We should note, however, we don't want to overdo the movement. They need to be comfortable to have correct movement. Now, as we spoke about earlier, this is where hoof boots come into the picture. And finally, we can help the horses overcome being shod, being barefoot, by helping their bodies with professional bodywork. Sometimes their muscles are held in artificial shapes and frames, and they need to be rectified as the horse's feet are let down out of shoes. This big lump of a horse, this is P. He's a 15-year-old Frisian cross, a fair lump of a horse. Now this guy started out with his feet in all sorts of trouble. He was shod for many, many years and he was starting to break down with lameness. Now he has transitioned as good as any horse around the place. And so I'm going to show you his feet and what actually occurs during the transition to get to good feet. Okay, so we're basically talking about the different structures of the feet and how they actually recover. Firstly, the digital cushion. During transition, that changes from being soft and weak and very thin to becoming thick and rubbery. And as you can see, a big part of his foot, that's his landing gear. That's what he lands on. So that's what we achieve through transition. The next thing is the sole. Under a shod horse, the sole might be as thin as 1/4 of an inch. And under this guy, it's probably 1/2 an inch. That's what we're aiming for. We're aiming for about 3/8 to 1/2 an inch of healthy, thick sole. All right, and then we have the hoof wall. When a horse comes out of shoes, often the hoof wall is very thin and weak. That's because it's bearing all the weight on the outside as it's not meant to do. So as soon as we relieve the outside of that wall, as soon as we relieve the outside of that wall, it frees the foot up. The new foot growing down has no pressure on it, and it can grow down at the correct width, as well as being much harder and healthier. And so during transition, we grow in a much thicker hoof wall. Right, now we should talk about the overall structure of the foot, the actual integrity of the foot. When a horse is shod and carries all its weight on the walls, the soles become very flat because all the pressure goes on the white line, the lamina, and the soles just flatten out because there's just no strength anywhere. As soon as we take the shoe off and give the horse its correct foot, we enable the integrity of the foot to pick up the concavity, and you have a much stronger, more correct shape to the foot. That is a really good example of a barefoot horse. Now this guy, I believe, is about to come back into work when he was virtual write-off. And that's the power of barefooting. Now this guy he's probably been just over 12 months out of shoes. And he's probably now as good as he's going to get. All right? But some horses, of course, are a whole lot more difficult to transition than others. Your flat-footed thoroughbreds, for example, they take a lot of work. It can be done, but you've really got to give them the correct barefoot lifestyle. And if you can't do that, that's when the hoof boots come into it. So how is best to condition your horse? All right, we get to the stage where they've got fairly healthy feet, they're moving comfortably in the paddock. You know when you're riding them, they're feeling pretty good. But if you go out on the gravel, they're sore. So there's two ways we can do this. The first is with a good hoof boot like the Easy Boot Epic. And the other way is to gradually build up the horse to hard work. All right? You might be able to walk 10 steps on the gravel today, 20 tomorrow, 50 the next day. Gradually increase it. Don't work the horse beyond his pain barrier. All right? We just don't want to be working horses sore. That's not part of the deal. That's cruel. We don't want that. When does tenderness become lameness? That's a pretty hard question to answer that. And this is where, when you're going through a process, if you're a beginner and you're going through the process of taking shoes off your horse and getting your horse into sound barefoot work, you really need the continued input of an experienced professional barefoot trimmer, okay? Because if a horse has some lameness, it turns up after the shoes are taken off, and that can happen because shoes can quite easily disguise a lot of lameness. All right? We don't want to be working that horse through lameness. So you'll need an experienced eye to tell you when that horse is walking okay at liberty, on its own in the paddock. And only then can you consider bringing that horse in and riding it. Okay, now we should just talk briefly about the level of conditioning that you want with your horse. Righto, so it really depends on what you want to do with your horse out on the track to how much you have to condition that horse. If your horse is a show horse or a dressage horse and is only going to be going on nice soft arenas or a show ring, you don't have to do terribly much conditioning. At the other end of the spectrum, however, are your endurance horses. Now, if you want to have a horse that's going to be able to go over all terrain, initially for 40 kilometres and then maybe for 80 kilometres and then up to 160 kilometres, you want to have that horse with absolutely rock hard conditioned feet, and that takes a lot of work. So they're the two ends of the spectrum, and most other things fall in between. It's a matter of trying your horse and just seeing how far you can go, and you get to know your horse. You'll know what they'll cope with, and you'll know if you have to go a bit harder, you'll have to put in a bit more work conditioning the foot. And don't forget the hoof boots. They are an absolute godsend to help a horse go from shoes to barefoot. Here we have Joker. He's the resident stallion here. He's our 15-year-old thoroughbred. And Joker really is the epitome of what a barefoot horse should be. He's just a picture of health, this guy. He's 15 now, and he's probably the best he's ever been. And in fact, last week he actually did a 40k endurance training ride barefoot. No worries at all. So this guy's been barefoot probably as long as any of our horses, and he just hasn't looked back from day one. So with Joker, we're actually talking about a maintenance trim. All the hard work's done. We've transitioned the foot to healthy barefoot, and now it's just a matter of maintaining those feet as we go along. All right, so it's actually just much the same as a setup trim, except a whole lot simpler. And that's how it should be. It's not rocket science, it should be simple. So once again, what we do is we dress down the sides of the frog just to keep them clean and to keep the thrush out of the frog area. Remember, barefooting is all about a healthy frog and heels and healthy landing gear. All right? That's the landing gear. That's the reason they can go over rocks. It's a cushion, it's a digital cushion. So there's usually never much to do underneath the sole of a barefoot horse. So just the frog, healthy sole, and then we basically just have to dress the wall off, the outside of the wall. These feet went over a lot of rock last weekend, and all in all, they haven't come up too bad. So we just take off the outer part of the wall on both sides. And we dress off any flare that's there. He hasn't got a whole lot because he's got pretty healthy feet. And that's all we need to do. And the maintenance trim, it should be done probably every 2 weeks, and the horse owners usually can do it. It's very simple. It's not unlike picking the foot up when you've got a shoe on and cleaning all the rocks out of the shoe. It should take about the same amount of time. You should be able to go around the whole horse in about 5 minutes. Right, now this guy, he's going fantastically well without shoes, but it's not always the case. What if a horse lives in a small grassy paddock and it doesn't have the opportunity to get its feet conditioned? Well, up until now, that's been a really big challenge for barefooting, and it's probably why barefooting hasn't been mainstream in the horse industry. But that's all changed now because we have hoof boots, such as this one, which is from a company called Easy Care, and it's called the Easy Care Epic, and this is probably the forefront of hoof boot technology at the moment. This is tried and true. A lot of people are using it to leg their horses up, as in get them from going from shod to barefoot, and they seem to do the job quite well. A lot of earlier hoof boots rubbed a lot on the horses and fell apart, and they just weren't up to it. So this is where it's at, and this is a good hoof boot. And the other thing about this is it's very, very easy to use. So if you're going out on a ride and you come to a patch of gravel and you think, oh, my horse is not quite up to that, and the last thing we want to do with barefooting is ask the horse to go across the ground when he's sore. We're not into sore horses. That really is cruel. So I'll just show you how to quickly put these hoof boots on, and you can see how comfortably he moves in them. Right, so it really is a very simple process. We just need to open the top up and fold it back and make sure everything's undone on it, and then we can just slip it on over the top of the foot. And we put the foot down and we adjust the tightness of the clamping mechanism. We want to have it as tight as possible, well, as tight as is comfortable, I should say, for the horse. And we just lever that down as so. It's tight enough when you need to use a hoof pick to undo it. That's when you know it's tight enough. And the other thing is doing the gaiter up, and that has to... Sorry, I was meant to pull that out. The gaiter needs to be tight as you can get it. You should have trouble getting your finger down in there. And there you have it. That's the Easy Boot Epic. It's tried, it's proven, and it's a good boot. Now the Easy Boot Epics are a very easy boot to put on. We have to make sure it's undone, everything's in the right place, the strap is in for pulling the boot on, and then all we do is we just slide it over the horse's foot, like so, and put it down on the ground, and we make sure the back strap is in okay around the heel bulbs, and we pull that out, and we then tighten up the cable as tight as is comfortable for the horse. It should be necessary to use a hoof pick to undo it. So that's about the right tightness. And then all we have to do is put the gaiter on around the pastern, and we put that on as tightly as we possibly can. It's full of elastic, so it doesn't matter how tight it goes, but the tighter the better. And there you have it. That's the Easy Boot Epic, a very easy boot to use. So hoof boots really are a crucial stepping stone to get a horse from having soft shod feet to hard bare feet. And the Easy Boot Epics, they really fill that void. They're easy to use, they're durable, the horse has no ill effects from them, and it just means that we can take the shoes off yesterday, get in our heels today, and basically get going. And that's what it's all about. On then, off we go. Now this is what I call reality. In a perfect world, all horses could be given a lifestyle that is fully conducive to bare feet. Reality, however, sees us keeping our horses in soft, small paddocks, and yet we still want them to be sound and competitive on all terrain, including this gravel road. Sometimes, fully barefoot at this stage is really not an option. Now in the past, it would have been necessary to put shoes on at least the front feet of these horses. But now we have a viable option, and that is the Easy Boot Epic. Easy boots are a practical solution to these problems because soft feet can be protected while a horse is being ridden and then removed so the horse can be turned out barefoot for transitioning to continue. I strongly believe that hoof boots should never be seen as a failure to go barefoot, but rather as a crucial stepping stone between shod and barefoot. Time for a bit of a pep talk. If you've stuck with me this long, you're probably going to stick it out to the end. Now, as you've seen, barefooting is actually quite simple, but it's not easy. We've still got to get over this little problem of time between when you take the shoes off and when you want to go galloping down that gravel road. All right? That's not easy. As I've said before, we're very fortunate to live in these times when we have the knowledge with these horses now, and we also have the means and the time to give them a better level of health. So it's actually our choice that we can make regarding these guys. We can actually choose to give up some time now to give them maybe 5, maybe 10, maybe more years at the end of their lives of useful work. But the hard thing is getting over that time. So often people get halfway through the transition period and they start thinking, oh no, I can't go on with this, we've got to go back to shoes. I'm sure with the hoof boots though, that won't be as big an issue. The thing about time though, which we really should talk about, is how quick did last year go for you? How quick's this year gone for you? You'll wake up tomorrow and it's going to be Christmas time. You know, that's the funny thing about people really. Time in the future, when we're waiting for something, is huge, it's endless. But time gone by, that's scary how small it is. So you've got the choice. If you take the shoes off your horse today, in a year's time, you're going to have a perfectly sound barefoot horse. But if you just don't do anything today, in another 12 months, you'll be thinking, well, where's the time gone? And your horse will be just the same, probably a year older and a year worse off. I'll put it another way for you. The hard truth when it comes to pulling shoes off horses and having them go with tender feet, the hard truth is that we've actually made them that way. We put the shoes on them in the first place. So surely it's not too much to ask that we can accommodate them for a year while they're getting over that. Maybe the mindset should be for us to, instead of asking, can I ride the horse on gravel next week? Maybe we should be asking, what can I do to help my horse transition to barefoot properly? Okay, the choice comes down to the long-term benefits for your horse versus the short-term convenience of having shoes on that horse. It's that simple. Now I'm sure I speak on behalf of all other barefooters when I say that we're growing old from the stress of dealing with sad dysfunctional feet on older horses that have been shod for a long time. Every time we get a bit euphoric about bringing one back from the grave or getting a lame horse back into soundness, very quickly there's another two come and take their place, and there's more stress and grey hair. But the future's looking a whole lot brighter because so many more young horses now, they're starting out barefoot right from the word go. They're never going to see shoes. They don't have the damage to be repaired and they just bounce straight into barefooting. So in the future, it's going to be a bigger and bigger thing. As soon as these babies grow up, away we go. Horses' feet have evolved over time to outrun predators on some of the harshest country in the world. Now I firmly believe that such a successful yet vital structure as a horse's foot must have a built-in safety margin. In other words, I think it may be over-engineered. It consists geometrically of a pyramid, that's the pedal bone, a cone, that's the hoof capsule, and a dome, that's the concave sole. These are three of the geometrically most strong structures known to mankind. A marvel of engineering in anyone's language. I reckon we haven't found the boundaries yet. Now just to finish up, I'd like to thank you for coming with us on our little story. The change from traditional blacksmith to barefoot trimmer has breathed new life into an old job. To bring a horse back from the edge of the grave, to see horses at their absolute peak, their absolute soundness and good health, it's given me more of a kick than I ever got out of shoeing. I practice what I preach, and my horses are the best they've ever been. You have seen the proof in this DVD. So why don't you give it a go? You've got nothing to lose, and it'll be one of the best things you'll ever do for your horses. So good luck, and please be patient with it. Oh yeah, and don't forget to get yourself a pair of good hoof boots like the Easy Boot Epics. They really are invaluable. Now just a little bit of wisdom to leave you with. If you want an opinion about a horse, ask a person. If you want a fact about a horse, ask a horse. My name is Andrew Bowe. I'm a Master Farrier, and I hope to see you sometime soon. There's a few people who deserve a big thank you. Firstly, to Garrett Ford of Easy Care Hoof Boots. Thank you for making this production possible. The future of transitioning shod horses to barefoot horses is now assured, thanks to your high quality and practical hoof boots. Now, to Louise McCormick and Gail Pound, two endurance riders from Australia who pioneered barefoot endurance riding in this country. Back in the early days, I had doubts about how far you could go with barefoot horses. I was still a farrier and I had my doubts. But you girls, you showed us all, and you've been an inspiration. Thanks to Chris Ann and Mike Ware and John Gorman of Equithy. You guys have been with me the whole journey down the barefoot pathway, and I have learned a lot from you. To Joe and Tatiana of Horse Rush, thank you for giving me the opportunity. And to everyone else who's helped me along the way, thank you. Okay, so here I have, all day I've been talking about pulling shoes off a horse and letting him go barefoot. Now you're probably thinking that I've never ever shod a horse before. Well, I've been in the Cape for a long time, and I reckon I can shoe a horse pretty damn good. Come on, I'll show you. Go on, off you go, shoe, shoe. On this, these make great gate latches.